how can we support pupils in developing conceptual understanding, and particularly in mathematics?
So there's so many things to do here. And before I start talking about all the sexy stuff, let me just reiterate the good classroom teaching is the number one thing you should be doing. And if you're not doing cold call, if you're not using mini whiteboards, or if you're not doing call response or things like this, or your own variant of it to match your teaching style, if you have students who can opt out of your thinking throughout the lesson, or the attention's being lost, or the focus being lost, just fix that first. That is the most powerful thing you can do to train conceptual understanding, in my view. And once that's in place, I think then we can talk about the more interesting and the more headline grabbing stuff, the big ticket items. The techniques, I would say, worked examples. So lots of worked examples, especially the higher up in I'm talking secondary maths here. We've got worked examples the last two sides of A4. Really think deeply about how you draw attention to the overall thing here, the overall narrative of what's going on. Catcher and Bone in the 90s did some work on the sub-goal learning model. And so once you've done the big worked example, you've talked about it through in a way that holds attention and a way that is engaging in the class and stuff like that. When the time is right and if the attention's still there and the focus is still there, then you highlight specific big sections of your working out. And you say, what was the sub-goal of this bit? Well, the sub-goal of that bit was to find what this missing value was. And then, okay, we've got that bit. Now we've got a big chunk of working out here that can all be grouped together. That's a sub-goal. And then eventually it's all leads together to be a overall goal. And so his research on the sub-goal learning model made a lot of sense to me, that we're thinking metacognitively about what led us to follow that path in our working out. So worked examples, loads to say there, and sub-goal learning model is quite exciting. And with that as well, your self-explanations. Self-explanations of sub-goals could easily lead in together here. The easiest way to implement self-explanations is think, pair, share in the classroom. However, if you trust your students to be switched on and using their time wisely, you can ask them to say, okay, we're going to stop here. We're going to have 1 minute where you read through it in your own heads, and I want it to make sense to you. And tell them to make sense of it. But that's a bit of a culture issue. Can you really trust them to sit there without zoning out? And I think for some of my classes, I can. I won't try it with the others. I use the phrase there, sense making, make sense of it. And I think that's a big idea of conceptual understanding. Make it make sense in your own head. Read through it, explain it to yourself. Why did that? Why did we do that? Why was that our first step? What was the point? Then we're talking about variation theory. I really like Craig Barton's work in variation theory. That goes back to Anne Watson's work as well. If you've not seen the classic Craig Barton podcast on variation theory, I really implore your listeners to check that out. I will throw in ideas about manipulatives and animations. So you've done a lot of work on manipulatives, I know that, and you know how to use manipulatives far better than I do. I like animations, and so that's what my research is on. But there's a lot of issues that animations can have, and if you're doing bad animations, then that can interfere. You want animations that are designed with multimedia principles in mind. So May's multimedia principles, it needs to be designed in line with them. And I'll give you one example of that: the transient information effect, where if information disappears from the frame of your animation before it's been processed and held in sufficiently well in long-term memory, then students have to work hard to recall that as they try to process the next frame. And if that previous frame is necessary to process the next frame, then you're going to have an extraneous cognitive flow there that interferes with learning. And that's a transient information effect. So if you are using some sort of animation or GeoGebra or virtual manipulative in the classroom, try pretty hard to avoid transient information. And a good way is to have maybe side-by-side windows of the previous, like maybe the folded up cube and the unfolding net over here. So they can refer this to this over here. Bit of split attention going on there that's better than split attention in time, where they're referring back to the previous memories there. I would say that kind of thing is a good way to avoid that. And the point of that is to be able to visualize how one dynamically transforms into the other and to form a coherent mental model of how the net and the cuboids morph into each other.
I think that's fantastic. I think because through your examples and through your sort of recommendations, what you've done is you've shown, because like the first thing people are going to like think is, how do we make sure that what we're teaching isn't just procedural, you know? And for worked examples, for variation theory, that's a criticism that gets leveled at them all the time. But actually, through your explanation, I think you've done an excellent job of showing how it's the concept, it's the why, it's like you said, the lovely word narrative that you're focusing
Mhm.
on there.